The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club are laying low tonight. Federal drug agents raided their El Cajon clubhouse early this morning, looking for nearly a dozen men with criminal pasts for violent crimes. Here's KUSI's Bridget Naso.
You're inside 419 El Cajon Boulevard. Get away from any doors.
DEA agents, along with police from El Cajon and San Diego, raided the Hells Angels clubhouse on El Cajon Boulevard in the early morning hours. DEA special agent and spokesperson Amy Roderick.
We executed a search warrant here at the clubhouse, and we're executing several search warrants throughout San Diego County.
To do that, heavily armed officers with El Cajon PD used explosives to blow off the front door.
Welcome everyone to Discover This. Well, today we got another installment in our Outlaw Biker series, and this time it's about a Hells Angels charter president who was doing so much violence that the cops really just couldn't ignore it anymore. And this was over the course of a few years, different acts of violence on different people, including members of the club, including citizens, including friends and supporters, and a deputy district attorney. So let's tell this story.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So this story begins on April 26, 2007. Nick Nef was a Hells Angel Dago full patch member, Dago being San Diego, for those that you don't know. And he was going to a church meeting that day, and church is their weekly meeting, you know, where they discuss club business and collect dues and that kind of thing. So they call it church. So he was going to the church meeting that day, and his plan was to quit the Hells Angels. He wanted to start a new life in another part of the country and just move on. Now, prior to that day, Nick Nef and Steve Sanders, the president of the Dago charter at that time, had gotten into an altercation a few days earlier, and Steve Sanders was injured to the point where he was actually wearing a sling. So they all get to the church meeting, and it really didn't go as planned, as at least the way Nick Nef wanted it to go. And he kind of made his point that he wanted to quit, and basically what happened is Steve Sanders ordered a prospect to kind of hold Nick Nef off to the side and guard him, prevent him from leaving, basically, while the rest of the charter had a discussion about Nick Nef and what was going to happen. So when they finally brought Nick Nef into the meeting, they basically told him it wasn't going to be good for him, and he was going to get out, but he was going to get out on their terms, which was basically he ended up having to fight one of the other members, and then they ended up holding him onto the ground while the vice president of the charter at the time, a guy by the name of David Dabbs, he took out a tattoo gun and started blacking out all of Nick Nef's Hells Angels tattoos. So at this point Nick Nef is being held against his will, and he's not allowed to leave the compound. So after this tattooing, Steve Sanders ordered two other members, a member by the name of Troy Shoulder and another member by the name of Jason Van Meter, to put Nick Nef in Steve Sanders' pickup truck. So they put him in his truck, and all of them drove off, and they drove around for a bit, and they ended up at a house where Nick Nef kept his pink slip, the title to his motorcycle, his Harley Davidson. And they forced him to sign over the pink slip. Then they put him back in the truck and drove around some more, and they ended up at the apartment of Nick Nef's girlfriend. And they went inside the apartment, and they kind of tossed it, and were looking for any kind of Hells Angels paraphernalia, any kind of indicia, you know, patches, stickers, awards, things of that nature. And they took what all they found, and they also took his television set, saying that belonged to the Hells Angels. Then they put Nick Nef back in the truck and they drove a short distance away, and then they just basically threw him out of the truck and left him on the side of the road. That was April 26, 2007. Now I should add that a number of years before, a DEA agent who had been working cases on the Hells Angels had given Nick Nef his business card, as happens from time to time, and usually the guys will just throw them away or whatever, never utilize them. But on this particular day, Nick Nef ended up calling that DEA agent and basically just telling him what had happened. And he didn't want to be a victim, he didn't want to prosecute, he didn't want to testify in court. He just wanted the DEA agent to know what had happened and know why he wasn't going to be seeing him around anymore. Kind of left it at that. Now fast forward to about May of 2010. May 5th, 2010 to be specific. So about 3 years and a few days past the Nick Nef incident. A Hells Angels supporter and friend by the name of Preston James is going to his workplace, San Diego Custom Cycles, at 3304 Hancock Street in San Diego, which used to be this building right here on the corner. It's all fenced off now. But he was going there to help clean up after their grand opening party the afternoon before. Now, San Diego Custom Cycles was Steve Sanders' shop. Other Hells Angels members came and went and hung out there, maybe rinsed on their bikes, that kind of thing. But the story is supposedly the girlfriend of a Hells Angel Dago member was flirting with, or maybe had a thing for, Preston James. Now that girlfriend and her Hells Angel boyfriend may have been on the outs at the time, or maybe not. But either way, when Preston James showed up at his workplace that May 5th, he was greeted with a beating from a baseball bat being wielded by Curtith Nielsen, a Hells Angel Dago member and the boyfriend in question. Assisting in the beating was Shane Sanders, Steve Sanders' son. Steve Sanders was orchestrating and supervising the beating. After the beating, Steve Sanders, another member named Michael Ottinger, and Shane Sanders, and Curtith Nielsen all took Preston James to his residence so they could collect any Hells Angel or support paraphernalia or indicia. They also took 2 handguns. They then left Preston James out in front of his house. Preston James was taken to the hospital by some neighbors, and they showed his pictures in court of what he looked like in the hospital. He's beaten pretty bad. Now the Hells Angels Dago members also procured Preston James' pink slip to his Harley Davidson. They in turn forged Preston James' signature on the title and transferred the title to a member of the Wrecking Machine Motorcycle Club using this San Diego Custom Cycles address. And this is where it was at the time. So now, in addition to these 2 assaults that we're talking about here, Steve Sanders was also accused of multiple other assaults and crimes around San Diego and elsewhere around California for that matter. Law enforcement took notice of these crimes and assaults, and eventually they got to Nick Nef and to Preston James, and they convinced them to become cooperating victims, basically. And once the investigation was all done by a multitude of different agencies, which took some time, Steve Sanders was being charged with kidnapping, torture, theft, extortion. David Dabbs, the vice president at the time, was being charged with assault and torture. Troy Shoulder was being charged with kidnapping, extortion, and theft. Jason Van Meter was being charged with kidnapping, extortion, and theft. Billy Castellano, another member, was being charged with terrorist threats and extortion. And Prospect member Dustin Haroon was being charged with false imprisonment for basically holding Nick Nef against his will while the charter talked about what they were going to do with him. That was for the Nick Nef stuff. For the Preston James incident, Steve Sanders was charged with kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, theft, and extortion. Curtith Nielsen was charged with kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, extortion. Michael Ottinger, another member, was charged with kidnapping, theft, extortion. Shane Sanders was charged with kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and extortion. So all this stuff culminated on August 3rd, 2011, when law enforcement executed search warrants at the Hells Angels Dago Clubhouse. They also went to various members' residences and also the San Diego Custom Cycles business.
Good morning. We begin with breaking news out of El Cajon. A SWAT team is assisting DEA agents on a raid inside the Hells Angels Clubhouse.
Authorities blasted through the doors of the building on El Cajon Boulevard in Johnson early this morning. News 8's Reka Mitaraj is live there. She's been there all morning long with who authorities are looking for and the flashbang explosions authorities deployed there. Reka.
Yeah, good morning, Dan and Nichelle. The law enforcement presence has since left and they are currently going to other locations, but you can see where they made entry at this Hells Angels Clubhouse early this morning. The door is on the ground there. Authorities came looking for suspected criminals and evidence to support the district attorney's case against several members.
This is one of several locations that we're going to be visiting today.
The Drug Enforcement Administration says after an almost year-long investigation, the district attorney's office has put out warrants for almost a dozen people who are either Hells Angels or associates. It's why around 5:45 Wednesday morning, police used flashbang grenades as a diversion before breaking through the heavily fortified door of a Hells Angels Clubhouse in El Cajon. No one was inside and no arrests were made. Authorities say the individuals are wanted for violent criminal activity, but would not elaborate.
Everybody that we're targeting today, we have several arrest warrants along with search warrants. They all have violent criminal histories, as well as what we're looking to arrest them for today.
And a spokesperson for the DEA says today's operation will take all day, perhaps go into tomorrow. She wouldn't say where the other raids would take place, but did say they are focusing on the southern part of San Diego County. In the meantime, Dan and Nichelle, we called the DA's office for more information about this, but they said this is an ongoing investigation and declined to comment. Back to you.
They had arrest warrants for all the participants. Some were arrested that day or soon after, and some fled. Steve Sanders fled. Troy Shoulder fled. David Dabbs fled. In fact, David Dabbs is still wanted for these crimes from 2011. He still hasn't been found to this day. Troy Shoulder was eventually found in British Columbia, and Steve Sanders turned himself in Hawaii. Now, most everyone got some prison time, 6 months or more, although prospect Dustin Haroon got probation. Steve Sanders was in jail waiting for his court date, and he had a couple of cellmates, or module mates anyway, who were getting out soon. And so Steve Sanders had a conversation with these two guys, and the conversation went along the lines of Steve Sanders solicited them to kill the prosecutor in his case once they got out. And it was going to be their job to arrange the murder of the prosecutor, the deputy district attorney that was prosecuting Steve Sanders' case. Well, these two guys were criminals, and obviously they were in jail for different crimes and things like that, but this was a little bit above their pay grade. And so they went to law enforcement and explained to law enforcement what Steve Sanders wanted them to do. So those two guys got wired up. They went back into their cell and they had a conversation with Steve Sanders where Steve Sanders reiterated what he wanted them to do once they got out. So that's another charge for Steve Sanders, in addition to all the other ones that were being brought against him. Now, Steve Sanders eventually pled guilty to multiple felonies, including the solicitation of murder. After he pled guilty, he decided to call a local news station and said he wanted to talk.
This former San Diego leader of the notorious biker gang, the Hells Angels, says he will spend the next 25 years in prison for crimes he didn't commit. Stephen Sanders talked exclusively with 10 News after his sentencing yesterday. 10 News reporter Maria Arcega-Dunn has the allegations made against the people who put him behind bars.
I'm in here for multiple cases. I'm in here for armed robbery with a gang enhancement. I'm in here for assaults. I'm in here for
offenses and crimes that include solicitation of murder, kidnapping, and torture are what landed 44-year-old Stephen Sanders 25 years behind bars. But Sanders, the former president of the notorious Hells Angels motorcycle gang, tells 10 News he's not guilty. Sanders accused the DA's office and DEA agents of focusing on him and other members of the motorcycle club because they wanted to make an arrest.
They try to label us a gang. We deny that. We're incorporated as a corporation. We pay federal and state taxes in the United States, and we adamantly deny that we're a gang.
Sanders tells 10 News his problems began in 2006. He and his family were constantly harassed by law enforcement and evidence against him tampered with.
Yeah, I was definitely targeted by the law enforcement agents. These law enforcement officers are just flat out obsessed with trying to put me and other Hells Angels in jail. And the district attorney's office is biased against us, and they go along with it.
He alleges drug enforcement agents altered evidence and raided his family home and businesses in San Diego over a 4-year period. In one case, he claims a fellow inmate and convicted murderer turned informant secretly recorded their conversations.
The audio recordings were damaging to me, to my defense, and once they were manipulated and they had the conversations the way they wanted them, that's what ultimately convicted me.
That was Maria Arcega-Dung reporting. Sanders told the court he was pressured into entering that guilty plea because he was faced with a lengthy sentence. He tried to withdraw that initial plea, but the judge denied it.
Now, Steve Sanders was sentenced to about 25 years in prison for his crimes, about 300 months or so. And he's currently housed here at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego County, about a mile or so north of the U.S.-Mexico border. He's a good company here behind these walls, these fences. He's got the Menendez brothers in there with him. He's got Sirhan from the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. He's in there. Tex Watson from the Manson family. He's also in there. So he's got some good company to play checkers with or work out or whatever they do. Have some conversations for sure. So that's going to do it, ladies and gentlemen, for this story of Steve Sanders and the havoc he created. So I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you taking the time. Please check out our other videos, and we will see you next time.